Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm Will Martin, and in this video, I want to talk to those of you that maybe you've recently become a nurse or a nurse practitioner or a PA, and you're dealing with something that I think a lot of us deal with, that struggle deep inside that you're lacking confidence. And if that remotely sounds like it could be you, just give me a few minutes to talk with you about it because I think I can add a little perspective for you. So you've probably heard of imposter syndrome, and you really feel like you're a poser. You're not knowing what the heck you're doing. You probably feel that you have no business taking care of real people, and for a lot of us, imposter syndrome is completely normal. And as time goes on, it does tend to fade. But for some, imposter syndrome is just, I don't know, it just seems to get worse with every day. So we have to ask ourselves why. Why is that? I mean, we've gone to school and hopefully we've studied reasonably well and we've passed the board exams. And so, why are we lacking such confidence that we really don't think we have any business taking care of people? So, I think there's a couple of perhaps smaller reasons and probably one big reason, in my estimation, as to why you're feeling the way that you are. So, let's talk about it. So, to me, one of the little reasons why you're struggling, and maybe this isn't such a little reason after all, is that school today doesn't really prepare you for the real world in the way that it used to. That's just a fact. In nursing, there used to be more emphasis on clinical experience while in nursing school. In fact, most nursing programs in the 70s and the 80s and even in the 90s were diploma programs that didn't reward a degree when you finished, yet they were often 3-year programs and you went straight through, including summers. So they didn't offer you an associate's degree, but one thing that they did offer was a ton of clinical experience. Most diploma programs were connected or even housed inside of a hospital. You studied in the hospital, you worked on the floors in the hospital, and most of the nurses who worked in the hospital were usually graduates of that same diploma program. So they had real insight into what you were going through. They probably were very familiar with your instructors and your clinical instructors. And so they were really able to help guide students through the process while you were doing your clinical work. I can vouch for this because I was a graduate of a diploma program. Students of diploma programs absolutely knew what they were getting into by the time that program was over. And by the time they were ready to take their boards, there was no doubt as to what the next step was going to be for them. But today, diploma programs are pretty much non-existent, and they've been replaced by associate degree programs and bachelor degree programs. And most of those are no longer affiliated or housed inside of a hospital, and instead they're part of a college or a university program. Most have no direct connection with a hospital at all. And the amount of clinical hours that students do today are way less than in the old diploma programs. This has led to nurses working in hospitals who come from, a bunch of different backgrounds, a bunch of different schools, each with their own preparation. And I think in that way, it does lose some of that cohesiveness that hospital nursing programs had back in the day. But what today's nursing students are really losing out on is that they aren't really prepared for what they're going to be seeing and doing once they graduate. Once they take that first job, it's a shock, I think, for a lot of them. And I see it firsthand all the time. New nurse graduates, they're excited to have their first job. But it quickly starts to realize for most people that the workload is way more than they ever got as a student. And they're also the new kid on the block, which means that they often get the worst assignments, they work the lousiest shifts, and they wind up working most of the major holidays. And I find that probably some of their coworkers are just miserable and not happy and not a lot of fun to be around. So I think for a lot of newer nurses and NPs and PAs as well, it's a shock. Now, the and there's one more piece to that too that I'll just add. I'll admit that when you're sick, you're at your worst. Everybody gets that. But a lot of patients that a nurse is going to care for, they're not on the brink of death necessarily, but some patients are just extremely demanding and entitled. And it goes beyond what most reasonable humans are going to want to put up with. And I'm here to tell you that as someone who became an RN in December of 1989, it wasn't always that way. I mean, believe me, it wears down any normal nurse or NP or PA. It doesn't matter. Just trust me, it wasn't always like that, like it is now, unfortunately. I don't know if it's a cultural thing or whatever, but patients are definitely more difficult to care for now. So the education system has changed, and that's not your fault, but it's set you up for a harder road as you role transition from a student to a working nurse. The second little thing that I think that affects a lot of people when they're doing that role transition is what their expectations are based upon what they see on social media and media in general. Over the past 20 years or so, there's been more and more TV shows that glamorize healthcare, and I think a lot of would-be nurses and others really have bought into it. Of course, on TV, they can't recreate what it's like to do CPR on a patient, and then an hour later, you're cleaning up a bed full of C. diff diarrhea. I mean, you aren't ever going to see that on television or on any social media. And if you did get to experience that as a student, it doesn't really sink in that some days that's what your entire work shift is going to be like. Not glamorous, not pleasant, but obviously necessary. So social media definitely adds to the problem. I mean, I don't do Instagram, I don't do TikTok, but just seeing the shorts on YouTube, I see videos of nurses in their, perfectly fitting scrubs with perfect hair, big smiles, and many might think, wow, I want to be that person, but that's not reality. And so if you're under the impression that working in healthcare in any capacity is neat, clean, or glamorous, you're going to find out otherwise. It's just the way it is because you're taking care of sick people. And there's all kinds of sick people that come along. There's nice ones, there's mean ones, dirty ones, and there's even ones that kind of like to threaten your life every once in a while, particularly if you work in the emergency department. So it's no wonder that a lot of new nurses bail out after the first year or couple years of practice. But assuming that you were, maybe exposed to healthcare in some way, shape, or form before becoming a nurse or an NP or a PA, you've already maybe got an idea what the ups and downs of healthcare are and what it might be like to take care of people. But for many of us, what I think really undermines our confidence in our ability is the fact that if you graduate from an NP or a PA program, you're pretty darn smart. You've identified a goal, you've reached it. It takes a ton of grit and perseverance to achieve that. You've studied hard and you've got good grades. You probably got good evaluations in clinical, but you get out there in the real world where there's a ton more variables than you were ever responsible for as a student, and you feel totally unprepared and probably totally incompetent in some ways. Like I said, I think almost all of us have been there in the beginning, and I think it's totally normal and probably in some ways healthy to think that way. But when it persists beyond a couple of years, I think there might be a problem that you have to face and address. And what I think the big problem is that you're expecting too much from yourself. You're smart, and because of that, you think that you should be almost an expert at everything, but you're not. You often just don't know what to do in some situations. You feel overwhelmed, you feel overmatched, and it's not your fault. But you fault yourself anyway, thinking to yourself that there must be something wrong with me, that maybe this just isn't the career for me. You think to yourself that you should be way better at your job than you are. And this is what I see in some fairly new nurses and others. They're smart, but they're kind of angry at themselves, angry to admit to themselves that they don't really know as much as they think they should. And this is a huge trap, because if this sounds remotely like you, I urge you to please take a step back and just listen for a moment. You're in a profession that treats an ever-changing list of diseases and treatments with an ever-changing body of literature to support it. You will always and forever be a learner. The sooner that you can break yourself of that feeling where, maybe you're too smart to ask questions, better off you're going to be if you can get over that. The fact is, practicing medicine or nursing 50 or 75 years ago was probably a lot easier because there was a little bit less to learn. I mean, yes, anatomy hasn't changed, physiology hasn't really changed, but the way that we diagnose and treat disease and the way that we teach and promote health is way different than it was even when I started. So many of us just want to walk into a patient room and immediately know what to do, but that's pretty rare. It's really rare nowadays. My advice is this: take advantage of all the resources available to you. Up to Date, for example, is a program that's on every computer in the hospital where I work, and it's a great resource. I consult it probably a dozen times a day. Sometimes I consult it just to learn something new, sometimes just to confirm what I already knew. The second thing is to ask questions. If you're an NP or a PA, I urge you to just, if you have a question, look it up first, get an idea of what that clinical question is that you really have, and then go to a senior or go to an attending and ask that well thought out clinical question. I still do all the time because it often generates a pretty good conversation about approaches to treatment or philosophy of treating something. It adds to your cache of knowledge. And if you're a nurse or your nurse colleagues will probably respect you a lot more if you aren't afraid to ask questions. And I know you don't want to be that person that's constantly asking questions, but that's kind of the way it is, and you have to do it. And I really believe that your colleagues will appreciate it and respect you more for it. As time goes on, you'll probably ask less, but for now, take the pressure off yourself and ask those questions. I truly believe that it takes 5 years for anyone to be competent at any job, to be proficient. And notice, I didn't say expert. Competent, proficient maybe, but not expert. Accept the fact that you may never become an expert because the science of medicine and nursing just moves too fast for most of us to become expert at anything. I certainly don't consider myself an expert at anything, but the one thing that I can't deny is I've got quite a few years of experience. And so I hope that my experience may help somebody who watches this channel. If you found my words helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel and give it a like. And I really enjoy reading your comments, so please leave me a comment. I promise to read it, and I'll definitely try to get back to you. I mean, sometimes it may take me a week or so because I'm still in full-time practice on top of all the other things that I do. But anyway, until next time, I appreciate you watching, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.